name is Jaden Duenas. This is Join the Discourse. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, 2021. Thumbs up here. The premise of the show is to join the discourse. And so a discourse is a sort of scholarly discussion. If you want to join in, you can join me at jd-originals.com. Find my Discord server there. You can send me an email or contact me there. You can just send me a DM if you like. Whatever you want to do to join the discourse, I welcome you. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about PTSD. But not the typical kind, not the military kind, the kind that you see in the movies, all of that. Instead, I want to talk about it in a different population, which is more at-risk, sort of impoverished communities. Specifically, I want to talk about the Black community, cities like Chicago, New York, mostly just inner city, kind of high-risk communities with higher rates of violent crime. The Latinx community in similar cities with high rates of violent crime, the white community, the Asian community. Really, PTSD does not discriminate. It affects many different kinds of people, but the common denominators are the presence of poverty and then the intra-community violence that stems from that poverty. And so because of those common denominators, I'm going to use Black Chicago just as my example, but just know that these trends, they apply very broadly to a larger group of people. And so PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. It comes in very different forms. One example we were talking about on the episode of Life with Matcha that I did with Destiny. Shout out Destiny. I know you're watching this right now. Episode 5 dropped today, but we were talking about CPTSD on our last episode. CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which just means a more complex version, more traumas, long enduring sorts of traumas, maybe childhood traumas, so stuff like that. But generally speaking, PTSD is just a mental health disorder that stems from experiencing trauma, whether that be violence or a car crash. I've heard of PTSD after a car crash people have had. But generally speaking, that's exactly what it is. It's just trauma that incites mental health in some way, difficulty with your mental health. So in the example of American soldiers experiencing war overseas in the Middle East, seeing yourself experience violence, being on the receiving end of violence, as well as seeing, hey Destiny, I see your heart, shout out you, being on the receiving end of violence or being on the giving end of violence, attacking people and the effect that can have on you mentally. In the example of Black Chicagoans, we see very similar levels of violence, but in a different way, a domestic way that isn't seen as commendable, isn't seen as supporting the United States in the military efforts. And so although Black Americans, Black Chicagoans, I guess, and American soldiers, they experience similar levels of trauma from violence and from, different community afflictions, how does society respond to each of their levels of trauma and to their PTSD? For soldiers, the United States calls them brave, calls them heroes, starts doing fundraisers, raises awareness, new legislation is created. In other words, visibility is created and help is provided. To Black Chicagoans, however, criminalized, arrested, incarcerated, killed, called thugs. In other words, no help is given and is left very much invisible. And the invisible aspect is interesting because it's invisible despite the fact that awareness is consistently raised for this issue. And the prime example of that is rappers. Rappers rap about PTSD every single day, every single show, every album, every single think about rappers like G Herbo, just from Chicago, thinking of Chicago examples. G Herbo has a whole album titled PTSD. Juice WRLD talks about PTSD. And every rapper does to an extent, not even to an extent, every rapper does, period, because that's just the genre of hip hop, is expressing these traumas and these experiences of hip hop and of violence and at-risk communities. And so even rapping about drugs is an example of rapping about PTSD, because drug use is a form of coping with trauma. And so it's not even just rappers, because people of all sorts of different backgrounds and all different professions, they take drugs. My friends cope with trauma and take drugs. I cope with certain levels of trauma, and I don't do anything that drastic, but coping is just a reaction to experiencing trauma and experiencing PTSD. And so if Black Chicagoans cope this way, how do others cope? So if others, cope the exact same ways, honestly, through mental health breakdowns, through committing acts of violence, through drug abuse and addiction, people all express their PTSD very similarly. On the individual level, there can be variation, but generally speaking, in terms of groups, Black people, white people, soldiers, civilians, all experience PTSD in very much the same way. But how does society respond to their coping mechanisms versus the coping mechanisms of Black Chicagoans? Well, for soldiers, we raise awareness, we bring help, we create legislation, etc. Again, we have programs for getting through these different difficulties. But to the impoverished, Black, white, etc., this is very general now. We're criminalized, called drug addicts, feared by society. But why such different responses from society? I think that those different responses come from embedded feelings we have toward each of these groups. And so those feelings come from centuries and centuries of living in a white supremacist system. I'm sure none of us have lived centuries and centuries, but people long term now have lived in this white supremacist system. Generations and generations have lived in the system that have carved out the grooves in our brain, our minds, and the framework that we view these people with. Furthermore, I think that the war on drugs created a certain level of embedded feelings for us, and that was through media imagery of Black Americans doing crack, Black Americans selling drugs, Black Americans killing each other, and furthermore, the legislation that occurred because of the war on drugs and during the war on drugs, the ongoing war on drugs, legislation was used by the government to influence American society, to mistreat criminals and people labeled felon. And furthermore, I think embedded feelings can come from nationalism that's promoted by the government through various levels of propaganda. Notice that I didn't say patriotism. I'm saying nationalism, because the government influenced American society support global imperialism and global capitalism with nationalism. And it causes Americans to think like we have to give our undying support to global imperialism and to the troops. But we say that it's because they protect us. In another lens, though, they commit acts of terror abroad using billions and billions, hundreds of billions of taxpayers' dollars. And that's not protection. That's not protecting anybody. It's a deliberate harm being inflicted on people using our money. And so it's almost like an investment in a way, a business investment. They pay billions for the equipment, billions for the labor, the troops, the labor force that commits these acts of terror abroad. And then they yield either money, thinking like Middle Eastern oil, or they yield influence by invading and killing people. So in that way, it's very much run like a business. And the military business, I guess, needs our support. They need support to continue funding imperialist campaigns that the U.S. is going to profit off of one way or another. They need support to continue providing a labor force, mostly poor people, who, among other things, are incentivized to sign their lives away. I want to stick on that for a sec, because I was almost one of those people as well. And so I wanna stick with this because I read this summer in a tweet. Honestly, yeah, it was a tweet. It was a tweet from a veteran criticizing the military, and he wrote in his critique, "Hate the military, not the veteran." And I just want to stick on that because, again, I was almost one of these people who was incentivized to sign my life away. I was almost a veteran. So to criticize veterans right now would be very hypocritical because it's clear why people join the military. They're incentivized to. They are deliberately asked to because the government and the people running the military, they want something from them. And I wasn't aware of that until I had people around me to tell me that. But not everyone has those people in their lives to make them aware of, the fact that the military, they don't have any other reason to incentivize you with these things like free education, free healthcare, all these things that they deny regular people who need those things. They have no other reason to do that unless they want something from you. And so the more you look into the reasons why they might want something from you, what is the history of the military, you're not going to understand that. So I'm not going to knock here on any veteran whatsoever, but I think it's important that you understand what you risked your life, or you are currently risking your life if you're currently serving. You risked your life for a cause that you believe in. That's commendable. I'm here to analyze right now the actual cause that you risked your life for, not through your eyes, but through the eyes of the government, what they actually wanted from you or want from you. And so, back to the topic. In contrast, Black Chicagoans, they make the U.S. profit in another way. They are quite literally the food between the teeth of white supremacy, as are other impoverished people, as are Black, Latinx, white people, just poor people in general. The teeth of white supremacy and of capitalism, of elitism in the United States. What I mean by that is that Black Americans make up the prison population that makes billions of dollars a year. They make up the labor force that allows corporations to capitalize and exploit their labor. And so if the politicians, if the military, if literal white supremacists are the actual teeth of white supremacy, they're the ones who go in and take what they want. Black Chicagoans and other impoverished people in the United States are the food between their teeth. They're the fuel that goes into the system of white supremacy, comes out the other end as profit. And that's all it is in the end. It's a form of profit making for wealthy white people. And so whereas the U.S. has a vested interest in supporting soldiers because of the profit that brings and the other forms of political influence that brings, the U.S. also has a vested interest in subjugating Black and brown people for profit. For the same exact reason, through profit, through the prison system, profit through the labor system, etc. And so ultimately, I believe that this is what leads to the disparity between how PTSD is treated in soldiers versus poor people, specifically poor Black and brown people. And so before I head out, this is Join the Discourse, and I want you to join the discourse with me. So I want to ask you, have you experienced any form of PTSD in your own life, or are you currently experiencing PTSD in your own life? How do you feel that you have been treated in your experience with PTSD? Do you feel that you've been criminalized because of it? Do you feel like you've been subjugated because of it? Or do you feel like you've been heroized or, praised almost for your experiences? Have you served in the military? Is that maybe where you got your PTSD from? How do you feel about my analysis of PTSD, if that's where you're coming from? And also, how do you feel about my analysis of the military and of imperialism and capitalism? Do you feel that that's a fair analysis? And if you don't, let me know why. I would love to, understand where you're coming from as well. So if you got something to say, again, join my Discourse server. You can find that jd-originals.com. You can also send me an email, jaden@jd-originals.com. Send me a DM. Any way that you want to get in contact with me, feel free to do that. Remember, you can listen back on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You can play back on Periscope for the time being. And then I think on, what month will that be? April 1st, after March, whenever. Yeah, it's April 1st, 2021. You'll get playback on Twitter because Periscope will be gone by then. But other than that, you can check out my YouTube channel, Jaden Duenas. You can find that on YouTube, or you go to jd-originals.com. You can find all my videos there as well. You can see my past live streams, past episodes of Join the Discourse. You can see my past art videos that I've done, doing those throughout the summer a little bit. I'm hoping to do some more pretty soon, hopefully, as well as more just like live stream events, like when I'm premiering new artwork. But other than that, yeah, I'm gonna head out right now. So thank you for watching. I hope you'll tune back in on Thursday to join the discourse. But yeah, thank you for watching.